I watched my stepbrother Marcus crumple my sketchbook into a ball and toss it into the trash. "Childish scribbles," he said, not even looking at me. "You're 23, Elena. When are you going to grow up and get a real job?" My father nodded from behind his newspaper. "Marcus is right. Art isn't a career. Maybe it's time you helped out at the company like your brother." I stood there in the kitchen of what used to be my mother's house, feeling the familiar burn of tears I wouldn't let fall. In my hands, I clutched the acceptance letter from the Sotheby's Emerging Artists program, the one I'd been about to show them, the one that would have changed everything. But I knew better now. I'd learned this lesson the hard way, twice over, because this wasn't the first time I'd lived this moment. This was my second life, and I remembered exactly how the first one had ended. 3 months from now, in my previous life, I would submit my portfolio to a local gallery under Marcus's encouragement. He would insist on helping me prepare it. Making subtle changes, he said, would make my work more commercial. I would trust him. I would believe that finally, after years of dismissal, my family was supporting my dreams. The gallery would love my work. They'd offer me a solo show. And on opening night, with critics and collectors filling the space, Marcus would reveal that every piece was actually his. He'd claim I was his assistant, that I'd stolen his concepts and tried to pass them off as my own. He had documentation, emails I'd sent him with ideas, progress photos he'd insisted I share for feedback, even a fake contract showing him as the primary artist and me as a hired hand. My father had stood beside him that night, backing his story. Said he'd always known I didn't have the talent to create such work on my own. I'd lost everything. The gallery sued me for fraud. The art world blacklisted me. I'd worked at a coffee shop to survive, drawing in secret, posting nothing, showing no one. Depression had swallowed me whole. I'd died at 28, alone in a studio apartment, a bottle of pills on the nightstand, and a half-finished canvas on the easel. My last painting had been of a bird in a cage, and I'd never gotten to paint the moment it flew free. But then, I'd opened my eyes in my childhood bedroom, 16 years old again, my mother's death still fresh, my father's new wife, and her son Marcus just moving into our house. I'd lived 7 more years armed with the knowledge of every betrayal to come. I'd watched it all unfold exactly as I remembered. The casual cruelties, the systematic erosion of my confidence, the careful theft of my artistic identity. I'd tried to change things, to stand up for myself earlier, but Marcus was clever. He'd adapted, found new ways to undermine me. So this time, my third life, third chance, I'd changed my strategy entirely. This time, I would let them think they'd won. "You're right," I said quietly, folding the Sotheby's letter and slipping it into my pocket. "I should be more practical." My father's face registered surprise, then satisfaction. Marcus smirked, finally showing some sense. I retrieved my crumpled sketchbook from the trash after they left the kitchen. The drawings were some of my best work. Studies of hands, portraits of people I'd seen on the subway, abstract pieces that played with light and shadow. In my first life, these sketches had been the foundation of the portfolio Marcus stole. In my second life, I'd hidden them better, but he'd found them anyway. This time, none of it mattered, because this time I wasn't going to let Marcus anywhere near my real work. I'd been reborn with 7 years of additional artistic development, 7 years of learning from the masters I'd studied in secret during my first life's coffee shop years, 7 years of understanding what made art sell, what made it matter, what made it immortal. My technical skill had compounded across lifetimes. Every brushstroke carried the weight of experiences Marcus couldn't begin to fathom. And I had something else Marcus would never have. I knew exactly which artists would become famous, which styles would trend, which gallery owners were looking for which aesthetics, and which collectors were about to make major purchases. I'd spent the last 7 years of this life preparing. While pretending to be the family's disappointing daughter, I'd been building something they couldn't see. The abuse had started the day Marcus and his mother Diane moved in, 3 weeks after my mother's funeral. I was 16, raw with grief, and my father was desperate to fill the void my mother left. Diane was beautiful, polished, calculating. Marcus was 2 years older than me, charismatic, and immediately positioned as the golden child my father had apparently always wanted. not a daughter who looked too much like her dead mother and insisted on wasting time with paint. Those first few months, I tried to connect with them. I'd painted a portrait of Diane as a gift, spent hours getting her smile just right. She'd hung it in the guest bathroom. When I'd painted a family portrait including all four of us, my father had said it was nice and left it leaning against the wall in the hallway, never bothering to frame it. But when Marcus casually sketched a landscape during dinner one night, something he'd clearly traced from a photograph, my father had it framed and mounted in his office within a week. That was when I understood the game. In my first life, I hadn't understood it in time. I'd kept trying to earn their love, their approval. I'd worked harder, made my art better, sought their validation like it was oxygen. And Marcus had watched me, studied me, learned from me, and then, when I'd finally achieved something worth taking, he'd taken it. In my second life, I'd tried rebellion. I'd fought back, called out the favoritism, demanded to be seen, but teenage rebellion was easy to dismiss. My father simply tightened his control, restricted my access to money and materials, made it clear that my future depended on my obedience. And Marcus had still found ways to sabotage me. More subtle, but just as effective. So, in this third life, I'd become invisible. I'd let them think I was compliant, defeated, accepting of my place. I'd taken a part-time job at a bookstore, kept my earnings secret, and told them the money went to practical things, like clothes and textbooks for the business degree my father insisted I pursue. In reality, every dollar went into art supplies and a storage unit across town where I kept my real work. I'd stopped showing them my art entirely. The sketchbook Marcus had found today? I'd left it out deliberately, filled with good but not exceptional work, the kind of thing that would feed his ego and make him think he knew the limits of my ability. My real sketchbooks, 15 of them now, were in the storage unit, along with 73 completed paintings and an entire series of mixed media pieces that combined traditional techniques with a style that didn't exist yet in this timeline. I'd invented it in my first life's lonely years. In this life, I'd perfected it. And I'd been documenting everything. Photos with timestamps, videos of my process, receipts for every material I'd purchased. I'd learned from Marcus's playbook. If anyone ever questioned the authenticity of my work, I'd have proof that would stand up in any court. I'd also been building relationships. The Sotheby's program was just one connection. I'd been commenting thoughtfully on artists' blogs, attending gallery openings, introducing myself to curators and critics. I'd even sold a few small pieces under a pseudonym, Elena Morse, a combination of my mother's maiden name and a scrambled version of my own. The identity had a growing following on Instagram, a waiting list of collectors, and a reputation for being mysteriously reclusive. No one knew Elena Morse was me, not even the gallery owners who'd sold my work. All transactions went through a P.O. box and a separate bank account I'd opened with a fake ID in my second life, a skill I'd learned from a fellow coffee shop worker who'd been running from an abusive ex. My father and Marcus thought I was a failure. They had no idea I'd already sold over $200,000 worth of art, and they would never know until it was far too late. "I've been thinking," I said at dinner that night, pushing my food around my plate. "Maybe I should work at the company, learn the business from you and Marcus." My father nearly dropped his fork. Diane's eyes narrowed, calculating. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Really?" my father said. That's wonderful, Elena. I've been hoping you'd come around." "I just think it's time I was more practical," I said, echoing his words from earlier. "Art is a hobby, not a career. You were right." The words tasted like ash, but I kept my expression neutral, even a little defeated. The key to this plan was making them believe they'd broken me, that I'd finally accepted their vision of who I should be. "You can start Monday," my father said, already planning. "Marcus can train you, show you the ropes." "I'd be happy to," Marcus said, his tone magnanimous. But I caught the glint in his eye. He was already thinking about how to use this, how to make me useful to him while keeping me beneath him. Perfect. I spent the weekend moving my most valuable pieces from the storage unit to a new location, a climate-controlled facility in a different part of the city, registered under Elena Morse. I kept only the decoy work in the old unit, the pieces I'd made specifically to be discovered if Marcus ever went snooping. Monday morning, I showed up at Reed & Associates, my father's commercial real estate firm. It was a family business his father had started, the same business my mother had helped build before cancer took her. By all rights, I should have had a place here. Instead, Marcus, who had no blood relation to the company's founder, was being groomed as heir apparent. "You'll start in filing," Marcus told me, leading me to a basement office that smelled like mildew and old paper. "Learn the business from the ground up." In my first life, I would have been humiliated. In my second life, I would have argued. In this life, I smiled and said, "That makes sense." For the next 3 months, I was the perfect employee. I filed, I organized, I made coffee, I stayed late when asked. I learned the company's systems, its clients, its vulnerabilities. I watched Marcus take credit for deals other employees closed. I watched my father turn a blind eye to Marcus's incompetence because he was so desperate to see his stepson succeed. And at night, I painted. The piece I was working on was called Resurrection. It was a large-scale oil painting of a phoenix rising from ashes, but the ashes were made of torn paper, contracts, family photos, newspaper clippings, and the phoenix's feathers were painted in iridescent colors that shifted depending on the viewing angle. I'd developed the technique in my second life, inspired by traditional Korean mother-of-pearl lacquerware I'd seen at a museum. It was the centerpiece of a series I called Rebirth. 7 paintings, each depicting a different stage of transformation from death to transcendence. I'd been working on them for 2 years, and they were nearly complete. They were also the most valuable things I'd ever created. In my first life, I'd never had the skill to make them. In my second life, I'd never had the confidence. In this life, I had both, plus the knowledge of what the art world would be hungry for in 6 months when a major collector with a Phoenix Foundation would be looking to invest in emerging artists with mythological themes. I knew this because in my second life, I'd read about it in a coffee-stained art magazine while working a shift. I'd thought about what I would have created for that opportunity. Now I was creating it. The turning point came on a Tuesday in late September. I was in the filing room when I overheard Marcus on the phone in the hallway. He was talking to someone about a property deal, and I recognized the address. It was the building where my storage unit was located. The old one, with the decoy art. "Yeah, we're acquiring the whole building," he was saying. "Demolition starts in 2 months. They're clearing out all the units, sending notices to the tenants." My heart rate didn't change. I'd expected this. Marcus had always been predictable in his cruelty. In my first life, he'd accidentally spilled coffee on my portfolio the day before a major submission deadline. In my second life, he'd told a gallery owner I was mentally unstable after I'd tried to schedule a showing. He couldn't help himself. Whenever I had something, he had to destroy it. He must have found out about the storage unit somehow. Maybe he'd followed me once, weeks ago, when I'd still been using it regularly. Maybe he'd hired someone to dig into my finances. It didn't matter. This was the trap I'd set, and he was walking into it perfectly. "Make sure the clean-out crew is thorough," Marcus continued. "I don't want anyone claiming they didn't get proper notice." I waited until he was gone, then pulled out my phone and called the storage facility from my old unit. "Hi, this is Elena Reed. I just heard about the building sale. When do I need to clear out my unit?" "You have until November 30th, Ms. Reed. We sent a notice to your address on file last month." "Oh, I must have missed it. Thank you." I'd received no such notice, which meant Marcus had intercepted it. He wanted me to lose everything in that unit, wanted me to discover my art destroyed or lost to demolition. It would look like an accident, like my own fault for not staying on top of my mail. It was almost beautiful in its cruelty. That night, I went to the old storage unit and took photos of everything. Then I created a new Instagram post for Elena Morse. Sometimes we have to let go of the past to make room for the future. Clearing out my old studio space today. These pieces represent a journey I've completed. They'll always matter to me, but it's time to move forward. I posted pictures of the decoy art. Good pieces, genuinely good, but nowhere near my best work. The post got 3,000 likes and hundreds of comments from followers invested in Elena Morse's mysterious journey. Then I locked up the unit and didn't go back. November came. I continued working at the company, continued being the dutiful daughter and employee. I watched Marcus become more confident, more careless. He started bragging at family dinners about his business acumen, his strategic thinking. My father glowed with pride. On November 30th, I was at dinner when Marcus's phone rang. He answered it, frowned, then excused himself. When he came back, he looked puzzled. Everything okay? Diane asked. Yeah, just a confusion with the Riverside demolition. The crew said one of the storage units was already empty. Thought maybe someone broke in, but the unit holder cleared it out weeks ago. He looked at me, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. He'd been expecting me to come home devastated, to discover my art gone, to finally break completely. I took a sip of water and said nothing. Must be nice to have nothing worth keeping, he said, needling. I smiled. Sometimes the best things we create are the ones we can carry with us. It was true in a way he'd never understand. My real art was safe. But more than that, I'd learned to carry my creativity, my resilience, my future inside me where no one could steal it. December brought the first major crack in Marcus's facade. A deal he'd been managing fell through spectacularly. He'd been so focused on impressing the client that he'd overlooked a major zoning issue. The company lost $2 million, and my father had to personally apologize to the client. It happens, my father said at the emergency family meeting. Marcus is learning. We all make mistakes. But I saw the doubt creeping in. It was small, barely there, but it was real. In January, another deal faltered. This one wasn't entirely Marcus's fault. The client's financing fell through. But Marcus had been so confident about the client's backing that he'd encouraged my father to turn down a more secure offer. The property sat unsold for months, eating up holding costs. I said nothing, did nothing. I just watched and continued to be reliable in my small role, filing things perfectly, catching minor errors before they became problems, staying quiet and invisible. And at night, I finished Rebirth. The 7 paintings were complete. They were transcendent. They were everything I'd learned across 3 lifetimes, poured into oil and canvas and mixed media. The colors seemed to glow from within. The textures invited touch. The themes spoke to something primal about transformation and survival and the stubborn persistence of hope. I photographed them professionally in my apartment. I'd moved out 6 months ago using savings from my Elena Morse sales, telling my family it was to be closer to work. I'd uploaded the photos to a private portfolio website and sent the link to exactly 3 people. The director of the Phoenix Foundation, a major collector I knew from my second life, was about to make a big splash in the contemporary art market, and Sarah Chen, a gallery owner who represented several artists who'd gone on to major success. In my first life, Sarah had been kind to me during the plagiarism scandal, one of the few people who'd seemed to believe my side of the story. In my second life, I'd never gotten the chance to work with her. In this life, I'd been cultivating a relationship with her for over a year through my Elena Morse identity. The response was immediate. Sarah called within an hour. Elena, these are extraordinary. I need to see them in person. When can we meet? I'm free this weekend. The Phoenix Foundation director emailed, I'd like to discuss acquisition of the full series. Are you open to meeting? The collector, a tech billionaire named James Wu, who'd just sold his company and was looking to build a world-class contemporary art collection, sent a text through my Elena Morse business line, name your price. I sat in my apartment staring at my phone, feeling the weight of 3 lifetimes of struggle compress into this single moment. Then I replied to all 3. The series is not for sale individually. I'm looking for a permanent collection placement that will keep the pieces together. I'm happy to discuss options. This was the gamble. I could take James Wu's offer and likely walk away with 7 figures immediately. But I'd learned in my first life that money alone wasn't vindication. I needed the art world's validation. I needed the prestige, the permanent record, the kind of recognition that couldn't be stolen or disputed. Sarah understood immediately. The Phoenix Foundation has been looking to launch their contemporary wing with a major acquisition. If they buy the series, they'll tour it to major museums before permanent installation. We're talking MoMA, the Tate, the Louvre. Your work would be seen by millions. Let's make it happen, I said. The negotiation took 6 weeks. Sarah was brilliant, playing the foundation and James Wu off each other until the bidding reached heights I'd never imagined. James Wu eventually bowed out gracefully, but bought 3 smaller pieces from my back catalog for $500,000. The Phoenix Foundation acquired Rebirth for $3.2 million. $3.2 million. For context, my father's company grossed about $5 million annually in good years. Marcus's salary was $120,000. I'd been making $15 an hour in the filing room. The sale would be announced in April with a major profile in art news and a touring exhibition beginning that summer. I was 24 years old and I'd just become one of the highest paid emerging artists of my generation. And no one in my family knew Elena Morse was me. I continued going to work. I continued filing papers and making coffee and staying late when Marcus needed help with urgent projects. I watched him take credit for my organizational improvements to the company database. I watched my father praise him for the smoothly running office, never once mentioning that the chaos had only stopped when I'd arrived. In March, Marcus announced he'd decided to explore other interests. He'd been posting more on social media lately, mostly lifestyle content, but he'd started including sketches and paintings, work that was technically competent but soulless, clearly traced or copied from other artists but just different enough to avoid. Obvious plagiarism. "I've always been creative," he told the family at Sunday dinner. "I'm thinking about pursuing art more seriously, maybe doing a show." My father beamed. "That's wonderful, son. You've always had an eye for beauty." Diane clutched Marcus's hand. "My talented boy." I sipped my wine and said, "That's exciting, Marcus. What kind of art are you making?" "Mixed media, mostly. Playing with texture and light, some mythological themes." He was describing my work, the photos he must have seen from the old storage unit before I'd moved everything. "Sounds ambitious," I said neutrally. "I've been in touch with some galleries. There's real interest." I'll bet there was. Marcus had the Reed name, my father's connections, and enough charm to convince people to give him a chance. He probably thought he could coast on pedigree and networking, just like he had at the company. He had no idea that in 4 weeks, the art world would explode with news of Elena Morse's record-breaking sale and stunning debut series. He had no idea that Elena Morse was about to make mixed media work with mythological themes the hottest trend in contemporary art. He had no idea that every gallery owner and critic who'd expressed interest in his derivative work would suddenly be comparing him to Elena Morse and finding him catastrophically wanting. The Art News profile dropped on April 15th, the same day the Phoenix Foundation announced the acquisition. The headline read, "Mysterious Rising Star Elena Morse Breaks Records with Rebirth Series." The article was extensive, featuring full-page spreads of each painting in the series. The writer waxed poetic about the technical skill, the emotional depth, the innovative use of materials. There were quotes from Sarah Chen calling me the most important artist of this generation. The Phoenix Foundation director said the series represented a watershed moment in contemporary art. But the most important part was buried in the middle of the article. Despite the high-profile sale, Morse remains intensely private. She declined to be photographed for this profile and conducted our interview via email. "The work speaks for itself," she wrote. "I prefer to let it speak without the noise of personality and biography. Art should be judged on its own merits, not on the story of who made it." I'd crafted that statement carefully. It explained my anonymity while simultaneously creating more mystique. It also established me as someone with artistic integrity, someone who cared about the work above all else. The profile went viral. By the end of the day, @Elena Morse was trending on Twitter. Art blogs were analyzing every brushstroke. The Rebirth series was being compared to Caravaggio, to Kehinde Wiley, to Jenny Saville. I watched it all unfold from my filing room in the company basement. Marcus stormed in at 3 p.m., his phone in his hand. "Have you seen this?" I looked up from my work. "Seen what?" "This artist, Elena Morse. She just sold a series for millions. It's the exact kind of work I've been developing." "Oh?" I kept my tone mildly interested. "What a coincidence." "It's not a coincidence. Someone stole my aesthetic." His face was red, his jaw clenched. "I've been posting my work online for months. Someone must have copied it." I looked at his phone at the images of my paintings. I can see some similarities, I guess. But these look pretty different from your stuff, Marcus. More Polished? His eyes flashed with anger. I'm calling some lawyers. This is intellectual property theft. Good luck with that, I said, and returned to my filing. He left, fuming. I knew his lawyers would tell him he had no case. My work was documented, time-stamped, witnessed. His derivative copies were posted months after I'd completed the originals, and any competent expert could see the difference in skill level. But that didn't matter. The damage was done. Marcus had been about to launch himself as an artist, and now he looked like a wannabe riding the coattails of a more talented creator. Over the next week, I watched the fallout with quiet satisfaction. Marcus tried to schedule gallery meetings, but the galleries that had been interested suddenly had scheduling conflicts. One gallery owner was more direct. We're looking for original voices right now, perhaps in a few years when you've developed your own style. He increased his social media presence, posting more work, writing long captions about his creative process. The comments were brutal. This looks like a bad Elena Morse knockoff. Who is this guy and why is he copying Morse's style? Imagine being this unoriginal and still having the confidence to call yourself an artist. My father tried to help using his business connections to arrange introductions, but the art world didn't care about commercial real estate networks. They cared about talent, vision, authenticity. Marcus had none of those things, and now it was obvious to everyone. At Sunday dinner, Marcus was sullen. Diane kept insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that Marcus's work was superior and would be recognized eventually. My father looked uncomfortable, perhaps finally seeing the limits of his golden boy's abilities. Maybe you should focus on the company right now, my father suggested gently. Wait for the Elena Morse buzz to die down before pursuing the art thing. I'm not giving up, Marcus said. I've worked too hard. I thought about my first life, dying alone with my stolen dreams. I thought about my second life, fighting battles I couldn't win. I thought about this life, working in secret for 7 years while they dismissed and belittled me. Maybe, I said quietly, some people are just naturally talented at certain things. It doesn't make them better people. Just means they've found their calling. Marcus glared at me. What would you know about talent? I shrugged. Not much, I'm just a file clerk. But I saw my father watching me, a strange look on his face, as if he was really seeing me for the first time in years. May brought the museum tour announcement. Rebirth would premiere at MoMA in New York in August, then travel to the Art Institute of Chicago, the Tate Modern in London, and finally the Centre Pompidou in Paris, before its permanent installation at the Phoenix Foundation in Arizona. The art world was rabid for information about Elena Morse. There were conspiracy theories that she was a famous artist working under a pseudonym. There were Reddit threads trying to decode clues from her limited online presence. Someone claimed to have spotted her at a gallery opening in Brooklyn, but the photo was blurry and inconclusive. I'd become a ghost haunting the art world's imagination, and it was glorious. The press attention brought new opportunities. Sarah fielded dozens of requests for interviews, commissioned pieces, collaborations. We were selective, accepting only the most prestigious projects. Elena Morse would create a series for the Venice Biennale. Elena Morse would be featured in a major retrospective at the Guggenheim in 2 years. Elena Morse would design a limited edition book cover for a famous author's upcoming novel. Each project I accepted added to the legend while padding my bank account. I was making more money in a month than my father made in a year, and I was still going to work in the filing room making $15 an hour. The cognitive dissonance was almost funny. I'd arrive at the office in the same sensible clothes I'd always worn, file the same papers, make the same coffee. Then I'd go home to my modest apartment and spend the evening negotiating six-figure deals with my laptop. I kept the apartment modest deliberately. I didn't change my lifestyle in any visible way. I was saving most of the money, investing it, watching it grow. But more importantly, I was maintaining the cover. No one could know, not yet. In June, Marcus made one final attempt at artistic credibility. He organized a show at a small gallery, calling in every favor and family connection he had. My father essentially paid for the opening, hiring caterers and sending invitations to every wealthy person he knew. I received an invitation. Family night at Marcus's art show, the card read. Join us in celebrating Marcus's first exhibition. The show was on a Thursday. I told the office I was sick that day, first time I'd called in since starting, and went to the gallery 3 hours before opening. The space was small but decent in a trendy part of downtown. Marcus's paintings were already hung, and I walked through them slowly, analyzing each piece. They were technically competent. He'd clearly taken some classes or watched tutorials, but they were empty. Every piece was derivative, not just of my work, but of dozens of other artists. There was a Basquiat-style piece that was pure imitation, a landscape that copied Hockney's palette without understanding his use of light, an abstract that tried to channel Rothko but achieved only muddy colors and confused composition. And there, in the center of the gallery, was his masterpiece, a mixed media piece with a phoenix rising from flames. The bird was stiff, amateurish. The mixed media elements were clumsily applied. The colors were garish rather than luminous. It was trying so hard to be my resurrection that it hurt to look at. I took photos of everything, then left before anyone arrived. That evening, I stayed home and watched the Instagram stories from attendees. The gallery was packed. My father's money had bought a crowd, but the comments I could see were tepid at best. Interesting. Nice try. Shows promise. Damning with faint praise. One critic I followed posted, "At Marcus Reed's show, earnest effort but derivative work that doesn't justify the hype. The ghost of Elena Morse hangs heavy over these pieces, and not in a good way." Marcus must have seen it. His Instagram post from that night was defiant. Real artists don't hide behind anonymity. Real artists stand behind their work, proud of tonight's show and everyone who came to support genuine creativity. The post got ratioed immediately. Comments poured in. Genuine creativity? Where? Elena Morse doesn't need to show her face because her work speaks for itself. Yours doesn't. This is sad. Just stop. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Then I remembered watching him crumple my sketchbook. Remembered him standing beside my father at the gallery in my first life, calling me a fraud and a thief. Remembered the casual cruelty, the systematic destruction of my confidence, the years of being told I was worthless. Whatever he felt tonight, he'd earned it. July came, and with it, the first real crack in my cover. I'd been careful, so careful, but I'd underestimated my father's growing suspicion. He'd been watching me more closely lately, asking odd questions about my schedule, my interests, whether I still drew. "You used to fill sketchbooks," he said one day, casual but probing. "Do you still do that?" "Sometimes," I said. "When I have time." "Just doodling, though, nothing serious." "That artist, Elena Morse. Have you followed her work?" "I've seen some articles. She's talented." "Diane thinks the paintings look like something you would have done back when you were trying to be an artist." My heart rate didn't change. "I think Diane's being generous. Elena Morse is a genius. I was just a kid with a hobby." He studied me for a long moment, and I saw the wheels turning. He was finally paying attention, finally really looking at me. But he couldn't quite put the pieces together. The idea was too absurd. His filing clerk daughter, the one he'd dismissed and ignored for 7 years as one of the art world's most celebrated new talents. But doubt had been planted. That weekend, I came home to my apartment to find signs that someone had been there. Nothing obvious. I'd learned to notice subtleties across 3 lifetimes. But small things were shifted. A drawer not quite closed the way I'd left it. A book at a slightly different angle. Someone had searched my apartment. I checked my laptop. Password protected and encrypted, all my Elena Morse business handled through secure platforms. I checked my sketchbooks, all still safely locked in my new storage unit. Nothing here could definitively prove the connection, but it meant they were looking. I needed to accelerate my timeline. The MoMA exhibition was 6 weeks away. I'd been planning to keep my anonymity until after the full museum tour, letting the legend build for another year before revealing myself. But if my family was actively investigating, I couldn't risk Marcus stumbling onto proof and finding some way to muddy the waters. I called Sarah Chen. "I want to do a reveal," I said, "at the MoMA opening." There was a pause. "Are you sure?" The mystery is part of your brand now. We could ride that for years. I'm sure, but I want to control how it happens. No leaked information beforehand, no press conferences. I want to walk into that opening as myself, and I want to be there when my family sees my name on the wall beside my paintings. Sarah was quiet for a moment. There's a story here, isn't there? Something personal. Very personal. Do you want to tell it? No, I just want to be acknowledged as Elena Morse, publicly and officially. Let my work and my success speak for themselves. The personal story stays private. Understood. I'll make the arrangements. We planned it carefully. My name would be added to all the exhibition materials a week before opening. Elena Morse would finally grant a single interview, print only, no photos, where I'd confirm my real identity as Elena Reed and explain that I'd used a pseudonym to ensure my work was judged purely on its merits, without the baggage of family connections or personal history. The interview would run the day before the MoMA opening. In the article, I'd mentioned that I'd worked a day job while building my artistic career, that I'd come from a business family that didn't initially support my creative ambitions, but I'd frame it as a common artist's journey rather than a specific indictment. I'd take the high road publicly while privately savoring their reaction. 3 weeks before the opening, the Phoenix Foundation made an additional announcement. They were commissioning Elena Morse to create a permanent installation for their new contemporary wing. Budget, $5 million. The commission was unprecedented for such a young artist. It made international news. The New York Times ran a profile. The Guardian called me the future of contemporary art. At Sunday dinner, my father brought it up. This Elena Morse is everywhere. $5 million for a single commission. Can you imagine? She must be very talented, Diane said, her tone tight. Marcus said nothing, just stared at his plate. Do you know what I find interesting? My father continued. She's our age, Elena, mid-20s. Been working in secret for years, apparently. Just building her career without anyone knowing. He was looking at me when he said it. Some people are good at keeping secrets, I said. And she's from this area, he continued. The article mentioned she grew up here. Went to local schools. Dad, Marcus said. Can we talk about something else? But my father was locked on now, the pieces finally falling into place in his mind. You know, I was thinking about those paintings of yours, Elena. The ones you used to do. You had one style in particular. The way you did light, the way you layered colors. It was distinctive. I was just copying techniques from books, I said. Were you? The table was silent. Diane looked between her husband and me, confused. Marcus had gone pale. You think Elena is this artist? Diane said, laughing. That's absurd. Elena works in your filing room for minimum wage. $15 an hour, actually, I corrected. And I never said I was Elena Morse. Dad's just making observations. But you're not denying it, my father said. I met his eyes. Why would I need to deny something so ridiculous? If I were Elena Morse, an artist selling paintings for millions of dollars, would I be filing your papers for $15 an hour? It was the perfect defense. The situation was so absurd that denial would actually make it more suspicious. By presenting it as obviously impossible, I made him doubt his own conclusion. I suppose not, he said slowly. But I saw Marcus watching me, a new calculation in his eyes. He'd spent 7 years studying me, learning my patterns, my techniques. If anyone could recognize my work, it would be him. I needed to move faster. That night, I called Sarah and moved up the reveal. I want my name on the MoMA materials immediately, tomorrow if possible. That's very fast. Are you sure? I'm sure. The next morning, I called in sick to work again. Then I sent an email to my father's office, copying my personal email so I'd have it on record. Dad, I need to take a leave of absence from the company for family reasons. I know this is sudden, but something's come up that requires my full attention. I'll be in touch soon. Elena. By afternoon, the MoMA website was updated. The exhibition page for Rebirth now read, Elena Morse, B. Elena Reed, burst onto the contemporary art scene in April 2025 with her groundbreaking Rebirth series. My phone started ringing within an hour. My father, Diane, Marcus, over and over. I let every call go to voicemail. That evening, I posted to Elena Morse's Instagram, the first personal post in months. After careful consideration, I've decided to embrace my full identity as both Elena Morse and Elena Reed. For those who know me by my legal name, yes, it's me. The girl who loved to draw, the daughter who chose art over practical careers, the woman you underestimated. I'm grateful for every challenge that shaped me, every doubt that pushed me to work harder, every dismissal that taught me to validate myself. The work speaks for itself, as it always has. See you at MoMA. The post went viral immediately. The comments exploded with curiosity, support, and speculation. Art world figures congratulated me on the reveal. Feminist blogs praised the decision to initially use a pseudonym. And somewhere in the city, my family was reading it, understanding, finally, what I'd become. I didn't return to my apartment that night. I'd booked a hotel room under my Elena Morse business identity, expecting my family might try to show up. I was right. Around midnight, the building's night security called to say someone named Marcus Reed was trying to access my apartment and claiming to be my brother. Please tell him I'm not home and he's not authorized to enter, I said. Already did, ma'am. He's been asked to leave the property. I smiled in the darkness of my hotel room and opened my laptop. There were 347 new emails, mostly interview requests and messages of support. There was also an email from my father, sent 2 hours ago. Elena, I need to speak with you. I don't know what to say except that I'm sorry. I should have seen this. I should have seen you. Please call me. Dad. I stared at the email for a long time. In my first life, those words would have meant everything. In my second life, I'd have wanted to believe them. In this life, I knew exactly what they were worth. Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry couldn't give me back 7 years of being invisible, of being dismissed, of watching Marcus get credit for everything while I was treated like a burden. Sorry couldn't undo the systematic crushing of my spirit, the deliberate sabotage of my dreams. Sorry was what you said when you got caught, not when you finally understood what you'd done. I closed the email without responding. The next day, the New York Times interview went live. I'd conducted it via phone from the hotel room, and the journalist was skilled, asking probing but respectful questions. Why did you choose to use a pseudonym initially? I wanted my work to be judged without any preconceptions. No family connections, no personal narrative, no expectations based on gender or age or background, just the art itself. I think it's important that we create systems where talent can be recognized purely on merit. You mentioned family connections. Your father is Richard Reed of Reed & Associates. Was there pressure to join the family business? There were expectations, yes. But I think many artists face similar pressures to choose practical careers. My situation wasn't unique. Your stepbrother Marcus Reed recently held his first art exhibition. Some critics noted similarities between his work and yours. Any comment on that? I'd anticipated this question. Think Marcus is exploring his own creative voice. All artists are influenced by what they see and experience. I wish him well in his artistic journey. It was perfectly diplomatic, perfectly kind. It was also damning. Every reader would understand exactly what I was implying, that Marcus had been influenced by my work, that he was following where I'd led. The article continued with questions about my technique, my inspirations, my future projects. I was articulate, thoughtful, professional. I came across as someone who'd been working seriously at their craft for years, not as a newcomer who'd gotten lucky. By the time the article published, Elena Reed, Elena Morse was the talk of the art world. From filing clerk to art world phenomenon, one headline read. The double life of Elena Morse, read another. And my Instagram following tripled overnight. I gained 200,000 followers in 24 hours, and everywhere people were praising my decision to work in anonymity, to build my career on merit, to avoid trading on family connections or personal drama. I'd controlled the narrative perfectly. The MoMA opening was August 12th. I hired a personal stylist for the first time in my life, let them dress me in a custom silk dress the color of sunset, learned to walk in heels that cost more than I'd made in a month at the filing room. I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving the hotel and barely recognized the woman staring back. She was confident, polished, successful. She looked like someone who'd always known her worth. But I remembered the girl in the kitchen, watching her sketchbook get thrown away. I remembered the woman dying alone, a bottle of pills and a half-finished canvas. I remembered the years of struggle, the lifetime of doubt. I remembered all of it, and I wore it like armor under the silk dress. The museum was packed when I arrived. Sarah had arranged for a side entrance so I could slip in without immediately being mobbed. The exhibition was in the contemporary wing, 3 large galleries dedicated to my 7 paintings. I walked through them slowly, seeing my work displayed with professional lighting, with plaques explaining the technique and symbolism, with crowds of people standing in reverent silence as they took in each piece. Resurrection was in the center gallery, the phoenix blazing with iridescent color. A woman stood in front of it, tears streaming down her face. A young man sketched furiously in a notebook, trying to capture something of its essence. A group of art students debated technique and meaning, my work speaking for itself. Finally. Elena? I turned. My father stood there, dressed in his best suit, looking older than I remembered. Diane stood beside him, her expression unreadable. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. "Dad?" I said neutrally. We... He struggled for words. "I didn't know. I never knew you could create something like this." "You never asked?" He flinched. "I know. I know that. Now, I've been thinking about it constantly since I saw your name on the website. All those years you were creating these incredible things, and I was telling you to get a real job." "Yes," I said simply. Diane stepped forward. "Elena, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We always supported your art. We just wanted you to be practical as well." "Please don't," I interrupted. I'm not here to relitigate the past. I'm here for my work. If you'll excuse me, I need to speak with some collectors." "Elena, wait." My father grabbed my arm, then immediately released it when he saw my expression. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was a terrible father. I dismissed you, ignored you, let Marcus take credit for everything. I was so desperate to make my new family work that I sacrificed my daughter. My own daughter." He was crying now, openly, in the middle of the gallery. "I don't know if you can ever forgive me," he continued, "but I need you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. I see what you are, what you've always been. You're extraordinary, Elena. You're the most extraordinary person I've ever known, and I'm so ashamed that I didn't see it until the whole world was forcing me to look." People were staring now, recognizing the drama. I saw phones coming out, people starting to record. I kept my voice calm, quiet. "I appreciate your apology, Dad. I really do. But right now, I need you to leave. This is my night, my achievement, and I need to experience it without the weight of our family history." "Of course, yes, of course." He wiped his eyes, nodded. "I'm proud of you, Elena. I know I don't have the right to say that, but I am. I'm so proud." He left with Diane following behind, her expression tight with something between anger and shame. I turned back to my paintings and took a deep breath. Sarah appeared at my elbow. "You okay?" "Yes," I said, and meant it. "I'm perfect." The rest of the evening was exactly what I dreamed it would be. I talked with collectors and critics, accepted congratulations, listened to interpretations of my work that were sometimes insightful and sometimes absurd, but always engaged. I signed a contract for a second major commission. I agreed to mentor a young artist through a foundation program. I scheduled interviews with 3 major publications. At one point, I stood in front of Resurrection and just stared at it, remembering the version of myself who'd died before she could paint the bird flying free. I'd done it. I'd painted the bird free. I'd become the bird. Near the end of the night, a museum security guard approached me. "Ms. Reed, there's someone at the main entrance asking to see you, Marcus Reed. He's not on the guest list, but he says he's your brother." I considered it. In my first life, Marcus had destroyed me publicly. In my second life, He'd found subtler ways to undermine me. In this life, he'd tried and failed to steal my artistic identity. What was there left to say to him? Please tell him the exhibition is open to the public during regular hours, I said. He's welcome to view the work then, but tonight is for invited guests only. Understood, ma'am. I watched the guard walk away, feeling the weight of that decision. I just turned away my stepbrother at my triumph, the same way he'd dismissed my art 100 times. It should have felt more satisfying. Instead, it just felt necessary. A door closing on a chapter of my life that had run its course. The exhibition was a massive success. Over 200,000 people visited during its month-long run at MoMA. The reviews were universally glowing. A masterclass in contemporary figurative art, wrote the Times critic. Elena Morse has arrived not just as a rising star, but as a fully formed artistic voice that will define this decade, said Art Forum. The touring schedule expanded. After Chicago, London, and Paris, museums in Tokyo, Sydney, and Sao Paulo requested the series. Rebirth would travel the world for 2 years before its permanent installation. I'd become, at 24, one of the most recognizable names in contemporary art. The money kept coming. Sarah negotiated book deals, licensing agreements, limited edition prints. I was profiled in Vogue, the New Yorker Times. Forbes estimated my net worth at $15 million and climbing. I moved into a penthouse apartment with a wall of windows facing the city. I converted one room into a studio with perfect north light. I hired a personal assistant to handle the deluge of requests and opportunities, and I kept painting. Because that was what this had always been about, not the money or the fame or the vindication, though those things were sweet. It was about creating, about pouring everything I'd learned and felt and survived into canvas and color, about speaking in the language that had always made sense to me, even when nothing else did. My second series, Remembering, was about memory and time and the weight of multiple lives. I painted it in secret, showing no one, taking 2 full years to complete it. When Sarah finally saw it, she cried, "This is your masterpiece," she said. "Everything you did before was leading to this." She was right. Remembering was better than Rebirth, more complex, more mature, more true. It sold as a complete series to the Met for $8 million, setting a new record for a living artist under 30. By 27, I'd achieved everything I'd dreamed of in my first life, and more than I'd thought possible in my second. I saw my father occasionally over those years. We'd meet for coffee, stilted conversations where he tried to rebuild a relationship I wasn't sure I wanted to rebuild. He'd retired from the company, sold it to a competitor, gave me half the proceeds without my asking, $2.3 million that I donated to arts programs for underserved youth. "I don't need your money, Dad," I'd said when he'd tried to give it to me. I never did. I needed your support, your belief, your attention. You can't buy those retroactively. I know, he'd said, but I want you to have it anyway. Please. Let me do this one thing right. So I'd taken it and given it away, turned his attempt at redemption into something that might actually help other young artists who felt invisible and dismissed. Diane had divorced him after a year. She'd been furious about the money he'd given me, about his obsession with making amends. She'd taken a settlement and moved to Florida with Marcus. Marcus. I'd heard things about him over the years. He'd stopped trying to be an artist after his first show's failure. He'd tried his hand at several businesses, all failed. He'd moved from city to city, job to job, never quite finding his footing. I didn't follow his life closely, but information had a way of reaching me. The art world was small, and people loved to tell me about my stepbrother's failures, as if I needed the vindication. I didn't. His failure wasn't what had made me successful. My talent was what made me successful. His dismissal had hurt me, his cruelty had shaped me, but ultimately he was just a supporting character in my story, not the protagonist of his own. I'd won, not by destroying him, but by building something he could never touch, never claim, never diminish. On my 30th birthday, Sarah threw me a party at her gallery. The space was filled with artists I admired, collectors who'd supported my work, friends I'd made in this strange, beautiful world of creation and commerce. I stood by the window with a glass of champagne, looking out at the city where I'd died twice and been reborn once, and I thought about the girl who'd watched her sketchbook get thrown away. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been, the victim, the fighter, the ghost. And I thought about who I was now, Elena Reed, who'd become Elena Morse, who'd become simply Elena, artist, creator, survivor. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I saw your newest piece at the Whitney. It's incredible. You were always talented? I was too jealous to see it. Too insecure. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're happy. M. Marcus. After 7 years of silence, reaching out, I stared at the text for a long moment, feeling the echo of old pain, old anger. Then I felt something unexpected. Pity. And beneath that, nothing. Just nothing. He was sorry. Maybe he even meant it, but his apology couldn't change what had happened, couldn't unlive the lives I'd lost to his cruelty and the family's dismissal. All it could do was sit there, a small acknowledgement in a sea of time. I deleted the text without responding and slipped my phone back into my pocket. Sarah approached, smiling. The Times critic just told me your Remembering series changed her life. She said she's writing a book about contemporary art, and your work will be a central chapter. That's wonderful, I said, meaning it. You seem reflective. Tonight. Big 3-0 hitting hard. Just thinking about the journey. How strange it is, how impossible it seemed, how inevitable it feels now. Regrets? I thought about that. Regretted my first life, wasted in pain and theft. Regretted my second life, spent fighting battles I couldn't win. Even regretted parts of this life. The years of pretending, of being invisible, of working in a basement filing papers when I could have been creating. No, I said finally. No regrets. Everything that happened made me who I am, made me create what I create. I wouldn't change any of it. And that was true. The suffering had depth to my work. The betrayal had taught me resilience. The multiple lives had given me perspective that showed in every brushstroke. I was successful not despite what had happened to me, but because I'd transformed it into art. Come on, Sarah said, linking her arm through mine. There are people who want to toast to your next decade. We walked back into the party, into the warmth and light and conversation, and I left the window and its view of past lives behind me. The epilogue of my story isn't dramatic. There's no final confrontation with Marcus, no tearful reconciliation with my father, no moment where Diane admits her cruelty and begs forgiveness. Instead, there's just life. My life, full and rich and entirely mine. I continued to create, series after series, each one growing in complexity and depth. By 35, I had work in permanent collections in 17 major museums worldwide. By 40, I was mentioned in the same breath as the masters I'd once studied from coffee-stained art magazines. I mentored young artists, especially young women from difficult backgrounds. I funded scholarships and residencies. I used my platform to advocate for artists' rights, for fair pay, for the importance of supporting creativity, even when it wasn't immediately profitable. I never married, never had children. Some people found that sad, but I found it freeing. My art was my legacy, my paintings, my children. They would outlive me, speaking to people I'd never meet, in languages I'd never learn, long after I was gone. My father died when I was 38. We'd rebuilt something resembling a relationship by then. Lunches every few months, careful conversations about safe topics. He left me a letter, read at his funeral, where he called me his greatest achievement. Not despite the art, but because of my strength, my resilience, my refusal to be diminished. I cried reading it, but they were complicated tears. Grief and anger and forgiveness all tangled together, much like the mixed media pieces I'd built my career on. Diane sent a card but didn't attend the funeral. Marcus didn't reach out at all. I heard years later that Marcus had found some measure of peace. He'd become a high school art teacher, working with teenagers who needed someone to believe in their potential. Someone told me he'd mentioned me once in an interview, called me an inspiration, said he'd learned from watching my career that talent and hard work could overcome any obstacle. It was a generous interpretation of our history. I let it stand. His version of events didn't change mine, and I was too far beyond it all to care about correcting the record. What mattered was the work. What mattered was that every time someone stood in front of one of my paintings and felt something, hope or sorrow or recognition or transcendence, A piece of my three lives spoke to them. The girl who'd been dismissed, the woman who'd died alone, the phoenix who'd risen from her own ashes. What mattered was that I'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to me, dying with my dreams stolen, and transformed it into the best thing that ever happened to me. 3 lifetimes of perspective poured into art that would outlive us all. I'm writing this now at 62, in my studio with the Northlight, surrounded by half-finished canvases and a lifetime of creating. My hands shake more than they used to, arthritis setting in, but I can still paint. I'll paint until I can't anymore, and then I'll find new ways to make art, new media to explore. Because that's what this story is really about. Not revenge, though that was sweet. Not vindication, though that mattered. Not even success, though I won't pretend it isn't satisfying to have built a career that dwarfed their cruelty in every possible way. It's about creation, about taking the raw material of suffering and spinning it into something beautiful. About refusing to let anyone else define your worth or limit your potential. About the stubborn, persistent, irrepressible human need to make meaning out of chaos. Marcus said my drawings were childish. He was right, in a way. They were drawn by a child, a young woman still learning, still growing, still figuring out who she was and what she could become. But children grow up. And sometimes, if they're given enough lives and enough chances, they become exactly who they were always meant to be. My art sold for millions. He never knew. Not really, not when it mattered. By the time he understood, I was so far beyond his reach that his opinion had become irrelevant. And that, more than any revenge, more than any victory, is what made it all worthwhile. I was free, my art was seen, my voice was heard, and I did it all myself.